So we are here now in the exhibition, one of the temporary exhibitions of the Ludwig Museum in Budapest. This exhibition is entitled Előhívás in Hungarian and Emplotment in English. The exhibition focuses on trauma, on the idea of trauma, but of course, since we are curators and art historians, we didn't want to deal with the idea of trauma from a psychological or from a social historian's perspective, but we wanted to explore the ways in which artists deal with the idea of trauma, especially in the last 20, 30 years when the role of the artist has changed a lot. And when we say this, or when we speak about the role of the artist, we have to think about like how artists work with communities, how they engage with different groups of people and make collaborative works with members of the audiences even. So it's a new approach that we have witnessed, and this has also an impact on how the artists deal with trauma. Another important aspect in dealing with trauma is that, especially in relation to the Holocaust, there have been many discussions, works, not just in the contemporary arts, but also in history and philosophy, like questions can the Holocaust be represented, or what are the proper ways of representing the Holocaust? But we didn't want to deal with works that merely represent traumatic events or trauma sources, but works that create a relational aspect between the trauma sources, the artist, and the viewers. So works that include the viewers in one way or another. And it was also important that we didn't want to deal with the Holocaust as a topic in this exhibition, and the exhibition doesn't enumerate traumatic topics or themes or events, but more like explores the ways in which artists function in this relational, in the relational works that they create. For this reason, we defined 5 of these possible roles for the artist, and of course it's not an extensive enumeration of all the possible roles, and some artists in the exhibition, or actually all the artists in the exhibition, assume more than one of these roles, but we found out that these 5 roles were the most important for us, and probably the most recurring of these roles. I can speak about these roles later when we see the work, so maybe it's easier to explain them. And maybe we can go and see some of the works and then explore these ideas further with the help of the works. One of the roles that we defined is we gave the name of revealing, when the artist is in the position of revealing a traumatic source. A source can be a person or an event, and very often artists try to discover traumatic sources that are hidden from the everyday discourse of a society or even a smaller group, and they try to reveal these sources and then do some work with these sources. And one example is Alfredo Haar's famous piece from the early 90s, when he heard about the events in Rwanda, and he felt that it didn't make into Western news, and nobody knew about all these atrocities and genocides that happened in Rwanda. And then he did lots of works in relation to that, including these 3 photographs, where also another question typical to trauma theory emerges, like can a landscape be responsible or guilty for a traumatic event? And in his case, he took pictures of a site, different aspects of a site where 300,000 or 400,000 people were murdered. And he took very innocent pictures of the road, the trees, and the sky. And these landscapes don't show the atrocities themselves, but somehow the viewer has to imagine and is somehow forced to imagine what had happened there. So he gives the exact locations, and then it's up to the viewer's imagination and perhaps empathic imagination to imagine what happened. And as we knew it from the news, it's like showing lots of dead bodies. After a while, it has no influence on societies whatsoever. They just switch off and don't care anymore. Another important piece is this one. It's by a Ukrainian artist duo, Lia and Andriy Dosliev and Lia Dostlieva. And we invited them to be part of this exhibition before, so last year, long before the war started in Ukraine. But this work is about the previous war in 2014, when the Russian army occupied certain parts of Ukraine, and actually they lived in Donetsk at that time, and they had to flee from that part of Ukraine, and finally they ended up actually in Poznan, of all places, so they live and work there. And that area has an extensive souvenir industry based on the sword that is mined in the area. And after this 2014 occupation, new types of objects emerged in the souvenir market, and that's a sword lamp with the shape of a tank. And so they bought this tank and they started to lick the sword of the tank, and they documented how the sword disappeared. And finally there is, of course, nothing but just the pedestal where the tank is placed. And of course it's interesting to think about, like, when the artists work with trauma, and they also try to repair the traumatic event, or give at least the opportunity to repair these events. Then licking salt or even putting salt into wounds just keeps the trauma alive. So it's not a way of handling the trauma, not the most productive way, but more like remembering the trauma all over and again and again. And that's something also important, that this repairing function that the artists take. But when we speak about that in the exhibition, we don't think about like the psychological aspect of repairing in the sense of a psychotherapy or you know, like group therapy, whatever, but it's more like how with the means of the visual arts this repairing process can start. This work here, this video installation, is by the German artist Harun Farocki, and actually we own one of the 4 videos here that he made in the United States at a military base where they train soldiers who went to Iraq or Afghanistan when the war was over, or when the war was on. And the army creates this really expensive VR technology to train the soldiers. So they, in the VR, they can see the real locations where they have to go to action. And there is a second part of this VR technology, that they use this technology also for treating post-traumatic stress disorder at the soldiers who went back. And it's also funny to see, and that's what Farocki highlights, like how The first videos before the action are much more detailed and much more sophisticated, and they seem to put much more money into it than into the videos that are meant to treat the poor soldiers who come back. And talking about soldiers, there is another piece, and it's not, as I said, not a thematic exhibition, and we didn't want to make thematic clusters in the exhibition. It's more like a chance, or like you need certain spaces or certain works. And this work behind the curtain is a 3-channel projection by the Israeli artists Ruti Selah and Mayan Amir, and they put an advertisement into newspapers, and they meant to meet young people in hotel rooms and interview them about their sexual experiences. And of course, as we know, in Israel, military service is compulsory for both men and women, and there is a lot of social pressure on doing it actually, so not escaping it. Then it affects the whole society basically. And when they interview these people, we can hear how much they are traumatized in an indirect way, because they're completely unable to build sort of healthy or normal relationships with emotional relationships or love relationships with other people, but they sort of channel this constant stress into completely promiscuous and unemotional chain of sexual experiences. Let's go a bit further, because when we speak about healing, it's important to speak about some concrete healing, and the idea of repair also appears in the work of Katalin. And in this video, he interviews various people, doctors, psychotherapists, social theorists, philosophers, about about trauma, but the trauma of missing a limb. And there was a very smart and interesting doctor who invented a method of dealing with the missing limb symptom, in the sense that you can have this phantom pain in the limbs, and that can cause people they really get crazy because it itches or it has a spasm, and there's nothing they can do about it. And this doctor discovered a method of a system of mirroring the perfect part of the body. So what the person who misses a limb sees is actually the doubled reflection of the perfect half. So he sees, or she sees, his or her body as perfect and complete. And then when they scratch that part, or they massage that part, the actually existing limb, then the brain somehow multiplies it and feels that the missing limb is also relieved and cured in a way. And that also, this theory is then extrapolated to social traumas and how you can treat them, and that's what the video is about. This work it looks very modest in a way, but of course, like the emptiness of the space is meant to be here, or we meant to make this space so empty to highlight the fact that there is something missing, and it's a recurring topic in the exhibition that one of the social scientists whom we invited to give a small talk, a short talk about this exhibition, highlighted that in the case of trauma, there are many times a missing person or missing bodies, something is missing. And in the case of this work, this artist comes from Myanmar, Thailand, and he built a big archive of about 500 of these hands that he was, you know, that we have, they have a military dictatorship in Myanmar. Sometimes it changes, but it always comes back. And he was imprisoned, I think about 30 years ago for getting a letter that actually, or somebody sent him a letter which he never received, but his name was of course mentioned, and the military caught that letter, and just because he was mentioned in this letter, he was imprisoned for 7 years. And he started this series partly in the prison and partly after the prison, so the idea came that he met people who were imprisoned for political reasons, and then he takes the plaster cast of their hands, and while so during the process of the casting, he makes an interview with them about like what happened, and it's a little bit like a small micro oral archive, and he has the hands in his studio and catalog and everything. You can see the catalog there, and all the reasons why these people were imprisoned here. Sorry, and then we wanted to exhibit this piece over the 500 hands, but then there was the regime became again a bit more severe, so we were scared that either they would confiscate the hands during the transport, or we would even create put him into prison again. So what we found with the help of, so we worked with the artist, and we thought that he would make one hand, a new hand, and he would send only that one hand, which is a small package, and then make a video and send the video as well. So instead of having 500 hands, we have the new hand, one hand that symbolizes all the other hands, and this gesture, the way his 4 fingers is shown, is also the symbol of resistance now in Myanmar. This work here, the photographs and the video there, is a work works by Mohamed Bourouissa, the Algerian-born French artist, and it's also about, you can say, about another idea we developed in the exhibition. It's like how the artist tries to point to the resources that even traumatized people may have and may use as a source to come over trauma or deal with the traumatic events that happen to them. And in this case, he had a friend who was imprisoned. Of course, it's all about the Parisian or French suburbs, the banlieues where the poor immigrants live. So one of his friends was imprisoned, and then the friend sent the artist a photograph with the help of a mobile phone that was of course smuggled in. So he sent this photograph to the artist as a friend, so not as an artist but just as a friend. And the work was made in 2008, so this is why this is a very basic technology, so not all the advanced cameras and video technology that we have now in cell phones, but like very poor technology. And so he sent this picture, and then the artist saw the potentials in it and got also interested in knowing more about prison's life, both for himself and as an artistic project. And then he also sent him requests what he should take pictures of, or even short videos. So the video is a sequence of footages from these instructions or coming from the prison, and the photographs are just photographic shots of the same prison life. And that also relates to other projects later in the exhibition, like how prisoners can be divided along races, and how much imprisonment affects more the non-white races in the Western Hemisphere, if you want. Talking about absence, this is a series of photographs by the German artist duo Daniel and Georg Fuchs, and they did this series in the mid to early 2000s when they visited the famous or infamous German secret police, the Stasi's existing offices. Some of these Stasi buildings have been turned or were turned to other, like even hotels or other places, but some remained intact. Nothing changed there. The way people left them, it was there, so the artists didn't have to stage anything. They just choose this standardized, they choose one point from which all the pictures are made, a standardized vision, very much following the rules of the central perspective, very old-fashioned art historical method, and then they showed how these spaces. Some of these spaces are offices, some are prison cells, some are interrogation rooms. But the the interesting thing about them is that they look identical. So in some cases, it's almost impossible to tell whether this was an interrogation room or just an office or what. And again, there is no, of course, nobody is visible. But then this is when I would speak about this performative aspect of so the performativity that the artist uses in creating this relational setup with the work, the viewer, the trauma, and themselves. And here it's like the large format of the photographs and these standardized vantage points or focuses imply that the visitor, the viewer, is either is there, almost we feel that we're almost there, and we're either, so if once we're there, we assume that we're there, we can be either perpetrators or victims. There are no third options, there are no standbyers or viewers, third parties, but just, so we have to identify either with the perpetrators or with the viewers, and none of them is an easy position. So talking about prisons and racism, this work by Katalin deals also with these questions. Actually, she was commissioned to do this series in the early 2000s, between 2000 and 2003. She's an American photographer, and she was commissioned to take pictures of people who were sentenced for major crimes, who were sentenced either for lifetime prison or for execution. And so the idea was that at certain stage around that time, the whole identification and criminal process were changed, because that was a time when they introduced the DNA as an identification source, and that replaced the mere facial or photographic
image.
Yeah, so previously, people, the witnesses identified the criminals by looking at pictures, or sometimes looking them at the police station, and just by looking at them. And we also know, and it's also very racist and racial, that if you have to identify somebody who doesn't belong to your race, you easily make mistakes, and very serious mistakes. And all these people, it's a longer series, so this is just a selection, were misidentified actually, so the DNA proved their innocence. The artist takes them, the people, these ex-criminals or now innocent people, back to either to the scene of the crime or to the scene where they had the alibi, but nobody cared because they were seen there. And so she takes these staged pictures there. And I think we have one here where you don't see the actual person who was misidentified. So in certain cases, these people were already executed, so or spent like really 20, 30 years in prison, and they. So they couldn't be, I mean, if they were already executed, no reparation would have been done. And this here, we can go in, is just a short. It's by the English or British artist Phil Collins. And he made interviews with most actually women who used to be professors of some Marxist-Leninist subjects, political economy or something. We can in the GDR times, so in the GDR, so it's like it's a trauma for all of them. So not just that the system changed, the political system. It's either they believed in the socialist system or not. But we know that the political repression in the GDR was really very tough. But some of them, so they lost their jobs, so the system changed, they lost their job, their country changed because of the unification, and some even had some personal troubles at the time. So it's like they had a whole set of different traumas and very difficult situation to deal with. And I think it's very important to have such works to think about the system of change, or how the Berlin Wall came down from other perspectives than this euphoric perspective that is almost exclusively the only perspective that is allowed to us, and nobody is ever supposed to question the euphoric nature of these political changes and speak about the losses and traumas that many people, like hundreds and thousands of people, have had to go through at the time. When speaking about resources, I think it's also important to, and it's kind of funny to see how these professors of Marxist political economy or all these ideological subjects that we had at universities, they only one of them among these three women went to the market economy, and the others chose very different professions. So it's, although one would assume that if you were a professor of Marxist political economy, then you were really very conscious about how capitalism worked, but that's that's interesting, like how people are able to use their resources and sometimes not, or really choose a very different path. And talking about resources, that's why I mentioned it. This work is by a Hungarian photographer, Barnabás Neobrowicz, and this is on a very different level, on a very personal level, that in a young age, in around 2007, he was diagnosed with brain tumor and had surgery, and his life was of course saved, but his vision was completely changed. And due to this surgery, with both of his eyes, he sees only the left side of the world, and the other side is blank, and it's with both of his eyes. And in this work, so in his work in general, he doesn't try to show people this vision, because of course it would be stupid and uninteresting, but he nevertheless, even if his vision is really impaired, he works as a photographer and makes the photographs. Many of the photographs deal either with vision, with the idea of vision in general, or some sort of mistake within the image, something that you cannot see because it's blurred or hidden or falls outside of the frame, or sort of these mistakes that he includes in the images. And with these he creates very interesting juxtapositions. So, as I said, the exhibition is not just about like historical traumas and events that touch a whole community, but also personal traumas that we can use to learn a lot from. And another piece that starts from a very personal level, but of course we can have a larger interpretation or a wider interpretation to that, is the work of Janet Paris with this small textual work, handmade textual work. She keeps sort of a diary. Of course, it's not systematic, it's just whenever something traumatic in an everyday sense happens to her, then she writes down the story. And the title is Bite Your Tongue, so it's like that situations when you're really humiliated by other people, or you feel bad, they make you feel bad and despiteful, and then you don't say anything, you bite your tongue, but you just these traumas keep on working in your head. And these are everyday stories, but in some of them we understand that this is a black artist living in London, and that some of the atrocities, of course, stem from this fact. So there's also this so we understand a lot about everyday racism via our own personal experiences. And this little video or animation, short, I shouldn't say little, but short animation, it's like a video clip that she did as a result of the COVID, and deals with the experiences of COVID, especially how artists were influenced, how artists and intellectuals or university professors were influenced by COVID. This is the work of a Cuban artist, Susana Pilar, and We also know it from our own experiences that in socialist times, at least in Hungary, we were not supposed to speak about poverty or domestic violence or anything that is that would have negatively influenced the political image of the country, or even like the image local people had about their own countries. And so she's a Cuban artist, and it's the same in Cuba. So she made a series of photographs in which she tries to raise these issues of domestic violence and rape against women. And in that sense, that's also, I could speak about another position. So far I have mentioned the performative, the reparatory, the revealing position, and also the resource position. And here we can speak about the catalyst, when the artist becomes a catalyst and shows these traumas that have been taken as taboos or impossible to speak about. So the artist raises these and then allows people to speak about them, or at least know about them in the first place. This is a video of Belinda Kazim-Kaminsky, who is an artist who has Congolese origins, but she was born in Vienna, of all places. So that's also funny for us to think about, like when we speak of colonization and post-coloniality or whatever, we always think about like Britain and France and Spain and the big colonies in South Africa or South America or Africa, but we have also colonial aspects here in Central Europe. And she discovered in the archives in Vienna a whole series of photographs made by an Austro-Hungarian ethnographer in the second half of the 19th century about Congolese people. And then she tries to work with these images and rewrite them from a perspective. So it's neither colonial, of course, nor post-colonial, but more like a decolonial perspective, like how you can deconstruct these images and work with them in a situation, in a paradoxical situation in which every visual knowledge that we have about the colonial past comes via the colonialists, so the ethnographers, the soldiers or the doctors or people who were actually the colonizers. So the colonized never took any images of themselves, but still these are important sources of information for all of us. So how you can re-narrate the story and sort of deconstruct the colonizers' perspective. And this is one way. So she invents several ways. This is one way of dealing with it, that she uses these colored fields, rectangles, and masks the colonized out, so we can only see the colonizer, the ethnographer himself. And in other pictures, she masks everybody out. We just have the shadows, so it's the question of how you can re-narrate this story with all this information. And another maybe like how much we are influenced by our stereotypical visions and thinking, especially in the art scene. Many people asked her if these were references to constructivism or the style or whatever, minimalist painting. And in fact, these are the colors of the Congolese flag. And when we speak about like artists trying to work against these dominant narratives of historical facts or what happened in history, then this part of this room, which we dedicated to a group mostly consisted of Roma artists. They were called Sostar. They don't exist anymore, but it was very important for them for us to have their interventions, and they were one of the first few people who tried to problematize this question of is there Roma art as such, or how Roma artists are treated by non-Roma artists here, not just Roma people, but it's the same duplicated in the art scene. And they did a lot of performative works about it. In this video, András Kállai, he uses his own blood and goes to visit Budapest's most famous monuments, and marks them with his blood, with his thumb, prints them like a stamps them with his own blood. And this video, it's a little bit similar to Belinda Kazim-Kaminski's work, that the artist took pictures out of the National Archive, pictures that represent Roma people, and kind of to try to tell Roma people's stories and narratives, and of course the pictures were taken both probably by Roma people and non-Roma people, but it's like raises this question of how Romas are represented, and how, if there's a way that the Roma artist can reclaim this representation. And the same goes with these videos about identity and representation. So if this is a Roma exhibition or not, and what could we call a Roma artist? Is it because it's a Roma artist with a Roma origin, or an artist dealing with the Roma issues? Is the same as with the African American artist or feminist artists. So the same questions can be raised again. And this other part of the room is dedicated to this national textbook project, which is a project by the artist Zsolt Keserű, and he started to collect, it was a 10-year-long project. He started to collect secondary school textbooks for history, where, so not Hungarian textbooks, of course, that was the starting point, but textbooks from all over the world, first the neighboring countries and then all over the world, that mention Hungary, some historical facts about Hungary. And of course, the further you go, the less facts are mentioned. And when it comes to neighboring countries, it's very often the same fact is mentioned from a very different perspective and viewpoint. And so he created an archive of the books. You see all where the books come from. And then he created a collage of these books, but it's not exhibited now here. And there is an online archive that you can visit here, and also wherever you go. And then this project was extended to a research in stereotypes about Hungarians, and that's also quite interesting to see, like how mostly of course tourists see Hungary and Hungarians when they visit the country. But it's also, we have, so as you can see here, we have some works dealing with these dominant historical narratives and how you can create counter narratives to these mainstream narratives. And this work also deals with history. It's a work of a Hungarian artist, Mária Schild, and she found this dress. Which is like the dress in her family's possessions, and it's a dress that follows the Hungarian sort of folk costumes. Of course, it's a bourgeois version, and people wore them on holidays or on different like celebratory occasions. So it was not like an everyday dress for a woman. And she found this dress in her family possessions, And then she started to research the background, and this whole traumatic family experiences that were revealed that even she didn't know and nobody spoke about also tells you how much traumas can be transgenerational, as we know it from Holocaust, that even third generation Holocaust survivors experience these effects, and very often completely unconscious influences and effects. So she started to dig into this family archive, and the funny thing is that every time she exhibits this project, new information starts flooding in, and so the exhibition is almost like an opportunity to continue the project. I think it's also interesting to see, because you have all the historical documents, but how, of course, the family was partly Jewish that she didn't know about, and partly really like right-wing, almost Nazis, so this mixture that is also sometimes typical here in this region. But then she tries to work with these images, and I think she does exactly the reverse of what Belinda Kaminsky does. She highlights the people and cuts the backgrounds off with these delicate images. And speaking about women's positions, this work, the installation, is the work of the Kosovar, I think Kosovar is the right adjective, artist collective Habit, and this was also a performance they did at the opening, and so they were using you can hear the sound of the performance. They were using the vacuum cleaners, and then they were shouting these swear sentences, not even cursing sentences, that in Kosovo families use with the children and or with other family members, and this is also an example for this transgenerational trauma that you hear this as a child, and it so much infiltrates you and becomes ingrained in you that you continue transmit it to the next generation, and it's very hard to stop. Like people are really, like young children are really traumatized if you read the sentences. It's may your eyes go blind, or may God break your neck. So it's a really strong words, and like what the artist can do with it. They try to show how that this position should be stopped. And with this video, this is the video they did actually when they were formed as a group. That in Kosovo, the parliament started to speak about rape against women in the war, the Yugoslav war. Only I can't see it now, but like much later, 20 years later. And then the discussion started, like how should they compensate these rape victims. And then one member of the parliament raised this question that how can we, like this typical question, like how can we believe these women, if these women were raped, we have to examine them to be able to prove that they were raped. And of course it's not possible, because I don't know, like how many years after that it's not even possible. And then they used this performance as a catalyst for a revolt against this stupid discussions, and to raise awareness. It's a little bit like also activism, like to raise awareness of all these atrocities that women had to go through in the war. And another also kind of feminist perspective appears here in the work of Selma Selman, who is a Bosnian Roma artist. And there is also a tradition in Roma families, at least there, to force, so get married the daughters at an early age, and actually to sell them. So the father expects either some presents or objects in return to marrying his girl to a family. And Salmon is of course very much against this, and in this video she shows how the process, how she found out how much money her father needed so she could buy her freedom. And it's about 11 something thousand dollars. So she works now, she sells her hair, she works, she does everything to collect this money so she can buy her freedom. And what did I want to say? Yeah, and I think it's important. And maybe the last work we shouldn't forget, it's the work by the installation by the Hungarian artist Adam Albert, and this work was made for the occasion of this exhibition, and it's a more poetic work. It's less about like concrete traumatic events. It's more an associative work where the viewers can have very different associations. The starting point is this limestone that is about 200,000 or 300,000 years old, Hungarian limestone. And if you look at it closely, you can see the little shells and insects ingrained in it. And so this whole unearthing process, like sometimes these traumas are so much buried and in such a fragmented way that it's very difficult to unearth them and to create like a narrative out of them. But nevertheless, they are there, and we can try to work with them.
Thank you so much. It was really interesting, and I enjoyed it very much, and I hope that our audience is going to benefit from this guided tour, and also that some of our audience is going to see the exhibition that is still on until the 28th of August at Ludwig Museum in Budapest. Thank you very much. It was Katalin Timár for us on the exhibition Emplotment.